Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about slope-intercept form for a linear equation. Before we get started, I'd just like to point out that over 90% of those who watch these videos are not subscribed. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe if you want to continue supporting the channel. So when you're talking about linear equations, there are a few ways you can write them, and the most common way is the slope-intercept form. As the name implies, this form very easily tells us the slope and the y-intercept of the line. When you have the equation y equals a times x plus b, the a, which is the coefficient of x, that represents the slope of the line, and the constant b represents the y-intercept. If we had a graph, this is what it would look like, where that point, which is the y-intercept because it crosses the y-axis, this point right here, b, would be the y-intercept, and the slope of this line right here, so the change in y over the change in x, would be a. If the equation of this line was y equals 2x plus 4, then the slope would be 2 and the y-intercept would be 4. So we could very easily replace these values with 4 and 2. This makes sense because, as I mentioned before, the coefficient of x, which is a, represents the slope of the line, and the constant that's added to the x term, which is b, is the y-intercept. So in this case, the slope is 2, and that corresponds to this value, and the y-intercept is 4, and that corresponds to this value right here. Now imagine if I had this line and it had the equation y equals negative 6x minus 4. What would be the slope and y-intercept? Well, in this case, they would both be negative. You can see how this line is going down as it moves across the x-axis from left to right. So that's why the slope is negative. The y-intercept is negative because, again, it crosses the y-axis at a negative point because that's below y equals 0, which is right there. So the slope would be negative 6, and the y-intercept would be negative 4. At this point, you know how to determine the slope and y-intercept of a line given the equation. Now, how would you figure out the equation if I gave you the slope and y-intercept? So we're basically flipping things around. Well, let's take a look. Let's say I ask you to find the equation of a line that has a slope of negative 3 and the y-intercept is positive 5. Take a second to write out this equation. Now let's work through it together. If we know the slope is negative 3, we know that that line has to be going down as it moves across the x-axis from left to right. And it also tells us the coefficient of x, because don't forget, the formula is y equals ax plus b, where a is the slope of the line. So we can start writing our equation. So y is equal to negative 3x, because the slope is negative 3. Now, b represents the y-intercept of the line, and we know what the y-intercept is. It's negative 5, right here. So we can move that down right here and add it to our equation because we add the y-intercept to the x term. So that gives us the equation y equals negative 3x plus 5. And that's the answer to this question. So here's where things start to get a little bit harder. Let's say I give you two ordered pairs and I ask you to find the equation of the line that goes through both of them. How do you do this? Well, let's take it one step at a time. Let's say you're given the ordered pair 3, 4, and 8, 14. The first thing we want to do is find the slope of the line that goes through both of these points. The way we're going to do that is by using this special formula that helps us to find the slope of that line. Now, I've already made a video about this, so if you haven't watched that, I would highly recommend that you go back and see that video. Now, if you have seen that video, let's get back to the question. For this case, we can say that this pair on the right is x2 and y2. And the pair on the left is x1 and y1. Now we can use those values and plug them into our equation to find the slope. So y2 is 14. So we're going to put a 14 here, and we're going to subtract y1, which is 4. So I'm going to put a 4 here. Next, we have the difference of our x values in the denominator. x2 is 8, so I'm going to put an 8 down here, and I'm going to subtract a 3 because that's x1. So we have 14 minus 4 over 8 minus 3. The top part is 10 and the bottom part is 5. Now 10 over 5 gives us a slope of 2. So I'm going to erase all of this because we now know that our slope is 2. Now we need to go to the second step. We need to find the y-intercept. Now this one's a little tricky. The given ordered pairs don't tell us where the line intersects the y-axis, so we have to use another strategy. So far we have the slope, and from the slope we can create this equation where we know the x term because we know a, which is the coefficient of x, but we still don't know the b term, which is the constant that represents the y-intercept. We can figure out the value of b because if we know that this line goes through this point and this point, then we know that if we plug in those values into this equation, then both sides will be equal. Whatever we plug in for y will equal whatever we plug in for x times 2 plus b. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to choose to use this ordered pair on the right, but in reality, either one would work. So we can start plugging in the values. Our y value, which is on the left-hand side here, is equal to 14. And that's going to be equal to 2 times the x value. And the x value is 8 from the ordered pair. So we have 2 times 8, and then we have plus b. And we don't know b, but we can figure that out. Because 14 is equal to 2 times 8 plus b, we can simplify this so that it's 16 plus b. Because 2 times 8 is equal to 16. We can remove a little bit of the clutter so that it's just 14 equals 16 plus b. Now, if we want to solve for b, all we have to do is subtract 16 from both sides, and that should give us b on the right-hand side and 14 minus 16 on the left-hand side. 14 minus 16 is negative 2. So b is negative 2. Now we can put that back into our original equation for the line. So b would go away and we'll replace it with a negative 2. And that gives us our linear equation, which is y equals 2x minus 2. So that's how we can use two ordered pairs to figure out our slope-intercept line equation. That's about it for this video. If you found it helpful, please like and share it with your friends and classmates. Thanks for watching.